Hello and welcome to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study podcast, where we explore and explain one chapter of the Bible at a time. My name is Luke and I am thy host. And today's chapter is Genesis 47. Let's go ahead and read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Before we get into our reading, I think what I'm going to do again today is to go over some context first, and then we'll read the chapter. So let's remind ourselves where we are in the story of Joseph, who has been our main character for several chapters now. Chapter 46, we're just going to go back one chapter. In the beginning of chapter 46, Jacob, or Israel, brings his family down to Egypt. God gives Jacob permission to leave the promised land and to come down to Egypt to survive the famine, which has now gone on at least for 2 years. It's going to be going on for 7 years total. Jacob and his sons don't have any food in Canaan. They don't have any pasture land to pasture their flocks and to feed their flocks, so they need somewhere to go. Joseph invites them to come down to Egypt, and God says, go. So they make that really long journey of about 450 to 500 miles, and we're given a list of all of Jacob's sons and some of his grandsons that made that journey also, and that's a big part of the last chapter, pretty much verses 8 through 27. That takes us towards the end of the chapter where Joseph is preparing to introduce his brothers and his father to Pharaoh. And remember, the Egyptians didn't particularly like shepherds, but Jacob and his family, they were all shepherds. And so Joseph seems to kind of use this to his advantage to get a special land for his family, the land of Goshen. He tells his brothers, he says, I'm going to introduce you to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asks you what you do for a living, just tell him that you are shepherds, and I'm going to request this land that's going to be great for you and for your pastures, and that I really think that you can thrive in. So he's preparing them to meet Pharaoh at the end of chapter 46. Now we're going to see them actually meeting and appearing before Pharaoh in 47. So let's go ahead and read the text of 47. Chapter 47 has 31 verses. So Joseph went in and told Pharaoh, my father and my brothers with their flocks and herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan. They are now in the land of Goshen. And from among his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. And now, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock. Then Joseph brought in Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojournings. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from the presence of Pharaoh. Then Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. And Joseph answered, give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock, if your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the following year and said to him, we will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. And give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was severe on the land. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance that Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, Behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And at the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and as food for yourselves and your households, and as food for your little ones. And they said, You have saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. He answered, I will do as you have said. And he said, Swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. So there you have it. That is the text of Genesis chapter 47. We see Jacob and his sons being presented to Pharaoh. At least some of Jacob's sons. It says that Joseph selected 5 of his brothers to take before Pharaoh. You know, if you're going in front of an important government leader, you have to select the best of your brothers. Some of your brothers might be goofy or like immature or something like that. you got to pick the best ones that are going to represent your family well. I don't know if that's what Joseph did, but I could definitely see that happening. So 5 of Jacob's sons and Jacob himself are presented before Pharaoh. And we also see towards the end of the chapter that the people of even Egypt run out of food, and they have to start making bargains with Joseph as to how they're going to get more food and what Joseph and what Pharaoh and the kingdom are going to get in return. So we'll talk about all of that when we break down the text in our outline section. If you don't have our PDF for today, you can download it for free on our website at tobelikechrist.com. It has all the key information on it. It's what we're going to be using. It also has a map that's going to be really helpful for you. You can also buy the book with all 50 outlines for Genesis on Amazon.com. There'll be links down in the description to both options. So let's quickly go over our foundational information on our first page of our PDF. The first section is our when section, our historical timeline. So Joseph was 30 years old when he became the ruler of Egypt. That would be approximately 1715 BC. Jacob's family moved to Egypt in the second year of the 7-year famine. That's approximately 1706 BC. And the famine lasted from approximately 1708 to 1701 BC. So we're in that time period between 1706 and 1701 in the events that we're talking about today. As far as our key characters, I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because we've already been introduced to them many times. The first one is Joseph, who's now ruling over Egypt just under Pharaoh. We have Joseph's brothers who have been forgiven for selling Joseph into slavery, and now they're moving down to live with Joseph in Egypt. We have Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. We have Jacob, or Israel, who's getting close to the end of his life. We're told the total number of his years in this chapter, 147. Now, he's not going to die yet in this chapter. He'll still be around for a couple future chapters, but we are getting towards the end of Jacob's life or Israel's life. And then our final group of people who we haven't really talked about a whole lot is the people of Egypt. They, in this chapter, sold their possessions and their land and even themselves into service of Pharaoh to buy food during this really, really bad 7-year famine. And now let's discuss very quickly our geography. As I mentioned, Jacob and his 11 sons were living up in Canaan. They, in the last chapter, travel about 450 miles to the southwest to move to Egypt. And in this chapter, they are settled in the land of Goshen, which was an area of land on the east side of the kingdom of Egypt. Okay, so now let's go ahead and break this chapter down and look at some of our key sections. The first one today is going to be verses 1 through 11. Joseph presents his father and brothers to Pharaoh. So Joseph took 5 of his brothers and brought them before Pharaoh and presented them as representatives of the family. We're not told which 5 specifically, but Pharaoh then asked them, as Joseph anticipated, what their occupation was. And maybe this was a common way of starting off conversations, or maybe Pharaoh was trying to figure out kind of where they would have fit into the Egyptian caste system. We don't know exactly, but they told him that they were shepherds. And remember, shepherds were kind of looked down on in the Egyptian culture. We're told that at the end of chapter 46. They told him that they wanted to come and live in Egypt. Specifically, they wanted to live in the land of Goshen because there was no pastures left in Canaan on account of the famine. Jacob and his family must have needed a lot of pasture land, and they just couldn't find enough to sustain their flocks. If you remember, back when we were talking about Jacob and Esau, they had to separate because the land of Canaan couldn't even hold all of their flocks. There were too many. So if you think about that, and you think how big the land of Canaan really is, and you can kind of consult the map to get an idea for that, Jacob's flocks must have been massive. And we also learned a little bit about that when Jacob was up in Laban's household and how God was blessing Jacob to become richer and richer and his flocks to grow and grow. No doubt they grew and grew over time until this famine came around. I was thinking, well, why doesn't he just eat his animals? Why didn't he just eat his sheep or, become carnivore? But if you think about it, maybe that would have lasted him a year or something like that. But if his sheep don't have anything to eat, then soon enough, he's not going to have any sheep or flocks left to feed him and his household. So he's got to find a way to sustain his herds of livestock. So at Joseph's direction, the brothers ask if they can live in the land of Goshen, and Pharaoh very graciously gave them permission to settle in the best of the land. Pharaoh, he owes a lot to Joseph. We're going to find out in a little bit that Joseph is a key factor in the land of Egypt becoming extremely rich, and no doubt, Pharaoh reaping the benefits of this. And so if Joseph came and asked for a favor, if his family showed up, Pharaoh had lots of reason and incentive to be good to Joseph because Joseph had done a lot for Pharaoh, and I think probably, like the situation with Laban and Jacob, Pharaoh probably realizes that he's being blessed because of the God of Joseph. He certainly should have realized that because it was the God of Joseph who interpreted his dream that allowed the land of Egypt to prepare for this famine when no one else had that privilege. So Joseph comes asking for a favor for his brothers. Pharaoh is likely going to oblige just about anything. So he gives them permission to go and settle in the land of Goshen, and he also says, if you have any able-bodied men, how about you guys watch over my flocks as well? So very well might have been the case that they took over some of the management of Pharaoh's flocks. After the exchange with the 5 brothers, Joseph then brings his father Jacob in, and Jacob blesses Pharaoh. Jacob is 130 years old at this point, we're told, and these dates that we have here and the ages of these individuals really helps us to put our timeline together. And so I'm really thankful that the Bible writer included these in here. It helps us to put all the pieces together when we're trying to figure out when all of these events happened and how much time is passing between all of these events that we're reading about towards the end, or at the end of Genesis. So Jacob at this point is 130 years old, and he tells Pharaoh something very interesting. He tells him that the years of his life had been difficult. Let me find that verse. They had been few and evil. It says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning. Jacob had lived kind of a hard life. He started off with that strife between him and Esau. Then he goes up to Laban, and he has problems in Haran with Laban and with marriages, the tricks that Laban plays on him, and then the issues that Laban and his sons are having with Jacob when Jacob starts to prosper and Laban is not prospering as much. And so then he has to run away from Laban, and then he has to come back down and deal with the stressful situation of meeting his brother again after those 20 years or so. Thankfully, Esau forgives forgave him, but no doubt it was a stressful event. And, he's had issues with his sons, with things that he's gotten angry with his sons about that we read about in the text. We have some of his sons not acting the way that he would want them to, like Reuben, when Reuben went in and had relations with Jacob's concubine. If you think about all the stuff that we've read about Jacob's life, he's kind of lived a challenging, difficult life. And maybe that's something or somewhat of what he's referring to here when he says that his days have been few and evil. And he indeed does not live as long as Abraham or his father Isaac. Abraham lived to be 175. Isaac lived to be in the 180s. I can't remember the exact age. I think it was 185. It's 180 something. He lived slightly longer than Abraham. But here, Jacob kind of realizes he's close to the end of his life, and he's probably not going to make it as long as his forefathers, so his days are few in that sense. Ultimately, he makes it to 147. So after having this, seems like a brief meeting with Pharaoh, Jacob leaves, and Jacob's family made their home in Goshen, and Joseph provided them with food from his storehouses. So they are provided for, they are set. God has taken care of the nation of Israel, the family of Israel, and he has big plans for them in the upcoming years. He's going to make them into a huge number of people, as we talked about at the end of chapter 46 in our application section. So that's section number 1, verses 1 through 12. Now let's go to section number 2, verses 13 through 27. The Egyptians sell their land to Pharaoh for food. This famine was a serious one, and it wasn't very long before the citizens of Egypt and the citizens of Canaan had given all of their money to Joseph to buy food. They don't have any money left. They've been purchasing food just like Joseph's brothers were doing. And after 2 years, or after a few years, we don't know exactly how much time has passed when they present themselves before Joseph here, but after just a couple of years, they don't have any money left, and they don't have any means of making any money, evidently. Probably the price of food was pretty high at this point. So when they ran out of money, they went to Joseph and asked him if he would give them food. And Joseph told him that he would accept their livestock as payment for food. And so they agree to this, and they start bringing their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph is buying them for the household of Pharaoh. No doubt Joseph has the means to sustain them and to keep them alive, which is something that these individuals, the common individuals, didn't have. Okay, well, that lasted them for a while. They were probably pretty hesitant to give up their livestock, especially any of them that helped them in their agricultural endeavors, as Egypt was an agricultural society, but they had to give them up. So they sold them to Joseph, but eventually they ended up running out. We've got no more animals left. What do we give now? We don't have any money. We don't have any animals. Our only assets at this point are ourselves. we can go to work for Pharaoh, and our land, if these people were landowners. So now they come back to Joseph and they said, "Why should we die before your eyes? Help us out here." And Joseph told him that he would sell them more food and seed so they could sow their fields in exchange for their land and their service to Pharaoh. So their land was going to be owned by Pharaoh, and then they would work as Pharaoh's servants. They again agreed. It seems like very happily they agreed to this, and Joseph bought, the text says, all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. So Joseph is buying up everything. He's bought up all the animals. He has all the food. He has now bought up the land, and all of the Egyptians are now servants to the crown. They basically work for the kingdom. Joseph gives them seed to grow their crops, to plant their fields, and for food, but he required them every year to give 1/5 of their harvest back to Pharaoh. And so now they're kind of perpetually the servants of Pharaoh, and every single year, Pharaoh is going to be pulling in 1/5 of everything in the kingdom of Egypt. So again, he owns everything. Not only that, but now it seems that he has a perpetual contract with the people of Egypt that they now work for him. And so the throne of Egypt has been incredibly enriched by the blessing that is Joseph to the land of Egypt. So yeah, that's why I mentioned mentioned in the beginning, Pharaoh, if Joseph came asking for something, Pharaoh was pretty much obliged to give it to him, because Joseph must have made the Egyptian empire just filthy rich. The system that he sets up is kind of like the feudal system that you read about in the Middle Ages, where there's the Lord, and the Lord owns all the land, but then he kind of lends it out to the peasants, and the peasants farm it for him and take care of it, but they have to give a portion of what they grow, what they produce or harvest, back to the Lord. So he's got all these people working for him, but he's really the one who owns everything. When you think about Egypt and history and all the archaeologists that are over there always digging up things, and they're always digging up, for decades now, I've been digging up these tombs of the pharaohs, and there's always an incredible amount of wealth in these tombs. Well, often there's an incredible amount of wealth. A lot of that wealth may have come into Egypt by the deeds of Joseph and by his wise dealings as he was managing the land. So no doubt this was a blessing to Egypt, not just in Joseph's day, but for generations and generations to come in the dynasty of the Egyptians. What's remarkable, but remarkably sad, is that in just a few generations, Joseph, and more importantly, Joseph's God, who saved and enriched Egypt, is going to be forgotten about by the Egyptians. They're going to want nothing to do with the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Israelites. In fact, they're going to blaspheme the God of the Israelites in just a couple generations. So they get to enjoy all of this wealth, but they forget the God who gave them all of this wealth, and the man who saved their nation, who was actually a foreigner. I guess that's kind of human nature, isn't it? We forget history, we forget the wise people of the past, we take for granted what we have, and we often live our lives unappreciative of the people who came before us and laid the foundation for the life that we're now living. This now takes us to our final section today, verses 28 through 31, Jacob's burial request. Jacob's family settles in Goshen and, quote, gained possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. So here, even at the end of the book of Genesis, we see them multiplying and multiplying. They're being very fruitful. They're having lots of children. And this is something that they are doing, but really God is behind this. And we're going to see this even more as we open up the book of Exodus, and we see all that God has done with this nation over a period of several or many decades. So they're being fruitful, they're multiplying greatly. When Jacob senses that the time of his death is drawing near, he calls Joseph to him, and he makes Joseph swear an oath not to bury his body in Egypt, but to bury it in Canaan. He wants to be buried with his forefathers, no doubt in the cave of Machpelah that Abraham had purchased to bury Sarah in all those years ago. That's where Isaac was buried, and that's where Jacob wants to be buried. He doesn't want to be buried in Egypt. And I think this shows us a couple things that are important. Number one, Jacob didn't see Egypt as his home, even though he had lived there for 17 years. He saw Canaan as his home. He still saw it as the promised land that God was going to give to his people. And him asking Joseph to do this indicates that he didn't believe that Joseph and his descendants were going to be in Egypt forever. Joseph made the oath. He swore the oath that his father was asking him to swear. He said, I will take your body back and bury you in Canaan. And we're told that Jacob lived 147 years. So that means he lives in Egypt for 17 years. Now, he doesn't die at this point. We're going to talk about him in upcoming chapters. So it is leading us towards the end of his life, but he still has some blessings and some prophetic words that he is going to speak towards the end of the book of Genesis. So hold tight for those. Jacob hasn't left us quite yet. Now, before I let you go for today, let's take a look at our application. I think it's going to be, a lot of people know this one, but I think it's good to be reminded of it because it's really obvious in the biblical text. I feel like sometimes we forget about it in the modern day. The Bible writers are constantly reminding us that it's God who permits countries to flourish and prosper, and it's God who humbles them and brings them low. The story here of Joseph and Pharaoh and Egypt is a prime example. Egypt became extremely wealthy during the 7-year famine, but the credit belongs to God. God is the only one who chose Egypt. It wasn't their own ingenuity. It wasn't their own, somehow they predicted this. They got a little hint. They got wise to what was coming in the meteorology reports. No, it was only God that elevated the nation of Egypt during a time when they really should have been crushed by the famine. So God deserves all the credit for the rise of Egypt. Without God revealing the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream to Joseph, Egypt would have been just as destitute as all the other nations. So he blessed Egypt because he had a role for them to play in his story. We've already seen some of that role, but we're also going to see it in the book of Exodus. What we need to learn from this is that God is providentially working among the countries of our world, even today, blessing some with success and humbling others as he continues to tell his story and as these nations play a role in the story that he's telling. When we read about God working in these ways in the Bible, it's like, oh yeah, it's so obvious to us the way that God is involved. We look at our world today, and I think sometimes it's less obvious because we don't have this kind of revelation about how God is specifically working and orchestrating, like the story of Joseph, for example. But God is still orchestrating the nations that are around us. Let's not think that politics, that geopolitical events, that these are all just controlled solely by presidents or prime ministers or dictators or people who are overthrowing other people to take control of governments, and that it's all just up to these men. And these men are all just kind of, operating on their own and moving the world in whatever direction kind of their will takes it. God is very much at work. He is bending the earth to his will. And anytime we pick up a newspaper or we get online or we watch the news on our television, we should interpret it all and view it all through that lens, that God rules over the nations, and ultimately what he desires will be done. And it doesn't matter how many people and how many powerful nations around the world are scheming and planning and trying to make the earth into what they want it to be. Their power is nothing in comparison to God's, and it's him who's going to get the last word when everything's said and done. And so his people can be confident that they are safe in the protection of the King of Kings. So that's going to do it for our study in Genesis chapter 47 today. Thanks for studying along with me. We're getting close to the end here. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow to discuss chapter 48.